Tomorrow is senior night for the BYU men's basketball program, and based on the comments from Mark Pope yesterday, as well as looking at what BYU has leaving versus what they have returning, it appears that BYU basketball could have some staying power in the Big 12 Conference.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? I'm Jake Hatch, your host here on Locked On Cougars, your resident BYU insider. Thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Appreciate all of you who are everydayers with us right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. We are your original daily podcast focused on all things BYU sports, and today's show is brought to you by our friends at LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and, more importantly, for free, my friends. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. All right, let's talk some BYU basketball. Now, it is senior night tomorrow night, and as Spencer Johnson pointed out during media availability yesterday, BYU has some payback is the term he used, payback on their mind as Oklahoma State comes to Provo. The first trip for the Cowboys to the Marriott Center and BYU since 1972. That's been a long time since the Cowboys have been out this way, but looking forward to this matchup. It was one of those games you look back on during the season for BYU, kind of what coulda, woulda, shoulda for BYU. That loss at Oklahoma State stings a little bit. And obviously road wins in the Big 12 come at a premium, but that was one of those games I think that BYU kind of ruse, and Spencer Johnson's comments indicated that yesterday during media availability. The other thing about it is, for a guy like Spencer Johnson, this game is going to have a little extra juice for him because it is senior night for the BYU basketball program. Mark Pope revealed yesterday just 3 players are going to be honored tomorrow night in their senior night festivities. Those would be the aforementioned Spencer Johnson, Traden Christensen, who's a walk-on who's been with the program for a few years now, and then Jaxson Robinson, the only other player that is slated to be honored, and obviously looks like he may be exiting the program at the conclusion of this season. Now, I know that there's still a lot of seasons still to be played. There still is a regular season game against Oklahoma State. There's the Big 12 conference tournament, and then obviously the big dance, the NCAA tournament beyond that. But if BYU and what Mark Pope is talking about is to be believed, BYU should and could have some staying power and should not have a quote-unquote sophomore slump year 2 in the Big 12 conference. Because if you look at the roster for BYU, losing Spencer Johnson and Jaxson Robinson stings. Those two, yes, they are losses, no doubt, for this BYU roster. But you bring back Khalifa, Fousseyni Traore in the front court. You already have guys like Dallin Hall, Trevin Nell, who's expected to be back for a 6th year as he is in grad school at BYU. A guy that a lot of people thought might be honored on senior night is Noah Waterman, but as Mark Pope said yesterday, their confidence level is, quote, high on him getting a waiver to get a 6th year of eligibility for himself, and it sounds like that he intends to remain with this BYU basketball program. Frankly, this BYU basketball team, if they can keep it all together. Now, that's a big question mark in this day and age of college athletics. You have coaches who get picked off by programs with higher paying paychecks or how much more money they can be paid. You have the transfer portal. You have NIL playing a role. So to consider that BYU is going to come back wholly intact outside of losing just Spencer Johnson and Jaxson Robinson probably is a bit of foolhardy notion to consider that. But even if they lose maybe a guy or two, they could still have a very, very capable core of guys to go into year 2 of the Big 12 conference with. And that's a positive sign. And there was an interesting anecdote that Mark Pope mentioned yesterday about how he's gone about building his roster for the Big 12 versus how he had approached it previously as members in the West Coast Conference. He talked about this in the West Coast Conference. He talked about the fact you had to kind of play the same style of game, sans maybe the matchups against St. Mary's and Gonzaga in the West Coast Conference, to avoid one of those losses that was that anchor around your neck when it came to your NCAA tournament chances. Losses against the likes of Pacific, who, by the way, Pacific had 9 points at halftime of a West Coast Conference tournament game yesterday. Brutal brutal scenes down there in Las Vegas, but alas, let's move along. But he talked about the fact that you had to have what he called a high floor in the West Coast Conference. You had to play kind of the same style of basketball literally every game and had to avoid a dip and losing one of those games. Because if you lost one, it was like one of those, he called it a death knell for your chances when it came to the NCAA tournament. But as he mentioned, the Big 12 conference, entering the best basketball conference in the country by a wide margin, has completely flipped that script on its head. He talked about the fact that now, whereas you had a big kind of a higher floor mentality in the West Coast Conference, now in the Big 12, he said the whole goal is to how high is your ceiling? And he said that the ceiling, honestly, you have to build it as high as it possibly can go in the Big 12 because, frankly, they are the best basketball teams top to bottom. If you look at all the rosters in the Big 12 versus what the national consensus is, it is the best basketball conference. And as he mentioned, maybe your ceiling at times isn't even enough on certain nights in this Big 12 conference to beat teams who are just simply better, shoot better than you, or just simply outplay you. But he talked about the fact that you want to have as high a ceiling as possible to give yourself the best chance. And that's the way he went about building this roster for BYU. And let's be honest, the overall results of this season going into senior night tomorrow night against Oklahoma State, it's been absolutely marvelous. This was a team slated to finish 13th out of 14 teams. This is a team who's going to end up as a 5 seed, maybe at the end of this, and could very well find themselves playing in Salt Lake City in the NCAA tournament. It's been an incredible debut in the Big 12 conference. And Mark Pope said that, yeah, that high ceiling comes with a lower floor, obviously, because the quote unquote trap door, the floor can fall out on you with BYU. And we've seen that a time or two here in this conference. But when BYU, this version of the BYU men's basketball program is playing at their peak, that is a team that can go on and run absolutely NCAA tournament. But as Mark Pope also cautioned, there are times that BYU can find themselves on the flip side of that and find themselves, as I mentioned, with that trap door, kind of that floor falling out from underneath them. And that is what you have to avoid at this juncture of the season. And you need to avoid that tomorrow night against Oklahoma State. Get the payback that you're looking for. Celebrate senior night in the right way. This is a BYU team that every time they've lost in the Big 12 conference this season, they have not allowed it to fester. They have bounced back and won the very next game. Don't let tomorrow be that first time you have a back-to-back loss in the Big 12 conference. That would put some bad juju, some bad momentum. It actually would take away the momentum heading into the Big 12 conference tournament. And also the other thing about this is if BYU wins tomorrow, and I'm not going to profess to be an expert on the tiebreaker scenarios for the Big 12 conference, but for all intents and purposes, based on what I read, if BYU wins this game against Oklahoma State tomorrow, you can pretty much say with 95% certainty that BYU is going to be the 5th seed in the Big 12 tournament next week. That's a good spot to be in. It's a very advantageous spot. You lose that game, well, then all kinds of other scenarios come into play. You can finish anywhere from 5th all the way to 8th in the seeding if certain things play out over the weekend. So handle your business. Beat Oklahoma State, celebrate senior night the right way, honor Jaxson Robinson, honor Spencer Johnson, make sure that they feel the love of Cougar Nation for all that they have offered to this BYU basketball program. And then, yes, let's look ahead to the Big 12 Conference tournament and beyond and see where things ultimately land for this BYU basketball team. But I really I was appreciative of Mark Pope kind of laying that groundwork. He made very clear sense as to how BYU is approaching things. The West Coast Conference required a high floor, whereas the Big 12 requires as high a ceiling as you possibly can build. And honestly, that, as you mentioned, sometimes that's may not quite be enough. And it's sometimes you get caught up and you have an off night and that floor is much lower than you had. But the Big 12 gives you that opportunity every single game, it feels like, to have a big night and to go out and prove yourself on a national stage. And once again, that comes up tomorrow night when Oklahoma State comes to town. Now, I got a couple of questions about the BYU basketball team I promised that we'd get to in a listener mailbag edition of the show. We'll touch on those in a moment. One of them we'll start off with involves Jaxson Robinson and his future, and we'll dig into that next right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Amazon Fire TV. Fire TV is your destination for sports, from live games to highlights to in-depth analysis. Fire TV is offering amazing viewing experiences with smart TVs, as well as the Fire TV stick that you plug directly into your existing TV that provides access to millions of movies and TV episodes, as well as free and live TV, my friends. It's an incredible product. Whether it's opening weekend for baseball upcoming or the college basketball tournament just a couple of weeks away, you're going to want to have a Fire TV and have it ready to roll. Fire TV recently created the Fire TV channels, which deliver a constant supply of the latest videos from your favorite sports brands, all for free. That includes all of us here at the Locked On Podcast Network and most of the pro big leagues, as well as the college conferences as well. Fire TV helps you dive into all the game analysis, highlights, and more to keep up to date on the latest in the world of sports, March Madness, NBA, MLB, and plenty more. Not to mention great news, entertainment, gaming, travel, and cooking videos as well. It's all available to you from our friends over the Fire TV channels app on Fire TV and also on Alexa devices. If you haven't checked out Fire TV channels, you should. Trust me on this. To learn more, visit amazon.com/lockedonfiretv. Once again, that's amazon.com/firetv. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. I want to remind you guys that we just talked about Amazon Fire TV. Well, Locked On has their first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and once again, also now on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. It's called Locked On Sports Today. It's got you covered every single day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league as well. Find Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and also on the free Fire TV channels app right now. All right, let's talk a little bit more about BYU basketball, but I threw it out on our Locked On Cougars Insider group about questions that you may have. I also threw it out on social media, but I'm going to give priority, as I always do, to our Locked On Cougars Insider group. First question that came in from Andy Stallings. He says this: does Jaxson Robinson have any more years of eligibility, or do you see him moving on? Well, first question to answer there, Jaxson Robinson does have another year of eligibility if he so chooses to pursue that. But reading between the lines, and something I have mentioned routinely here on this podcast, is everything I have heard is that Jaxson Robinson is intent on pursuing his future elsewhere. What does that mean? Does that mean he could go find another program and cash in on NIL? Yes, I believe that is an option for him, because a guy of his caliber, length, athleticism, shooting, all of that, he could make a chunk of change in college basketball with NIL. But I think the priority for Jaxson Robinson at this point in his college basketball run and career is to go pro. He is currently being projected as a second-round pick in the NBA. And honestly, as Mark Pope said, if he's a first-round pick, he's got to go. He said that. If he's a first-round pick, he's got to go. But he said we'll have to figure that out as it comes, as the season wraps up and we get into the pre-draft process. But frankly, folks, even if Jaxson Robinson can latch on as a second-round pick in the NBA, spend time in the G League, honing his craft, cashing an NBA paycheck, I think that's the priority for Jaxson Robinson at this point. Now, I can't proclaim to know what's in his head and in his heart, but that's me reading between the lines, that it sounds like that he is, for all intents and purposes, his time at BYU has come to a close. And obviously, you'd like to see this BYU basketball team have a guy like that back for another season, but hey, you got to go and cash in while your stock is at its highest. And frankly, I don't think Jaxson Robinson's stock will get any higher than it is right now. Now, another question about BYU basketball, interesting one here that relates to BYU football, comes from our good friend John Solomon. Says this: does BYU basketball have a better outlook of success than football, or is football more geared towards success than basketball? That is a great question, John. Now, if you're looking at the two debuts here in the Big 12 Conference, the football program had a 5-2 record and then suffered a rough 5-game losing streak to end up going bowlless and missing out on an opportunity to make a fairly positive impression year one in the Big 12. They finished 5-7, and a lot of people kind of have cast them off. You look at the projections for them going into next year. Frankly, at this juncture, looking at this BYU basketball team, as I mentioned earlier on today's show, the staying power this BYU basketball roster could have going into next year, frankly, right now, the outlook probably tips in favor of BYU basketball. Could BYU football steal that right back and go out there and put together a very solid season this fall and completely change the conversation? Yes, they could. But until they prove that, you got to kind of look at the body of evidence. And it says that the basketball program right now has the better outlook, as you mentioned, of success than football currently. And that's not to say that football has not a dire circumstance, but the BYU basketball program, it's come out of seemingly nowhere, but Mark Pope's done a very, very good job. Now, that could all be blown up really, really quick. He takes another job. A lot of guys decide to go cash in on NIL. Who knows what scenarios could play out. But based on everything we know about right now with regards to basketball, I would say he's got the better outlook currently. Nick Chadwick asked this question. Got an NIL question. Do you feel like BYU men's basketball and football will continue to see big increases from bigger boosters after the recent success in basketball and the recruiting trail in football? And that also brings me to another question with regards to NIL from our good friend Casey Finlinson, who asked on social media, Jake, do you get the sense that there's NIL fatigue out there amongst college football and just college sports fans in general? Well, the NIL question for Nick is I believe that there will be boosters who are willing to open up the pocketbook, but BYU's kind of been cautious about accepting any and all comers with regards to the deep pocketbooks and throwing just monster numbers of cash at athletes. I'm not saying the BYU is not flush with cash, because everything that I understand about BYU's NIL situation is they are very capable of paying what they need to if they feel the need to, but they're not ready to go all in on the nuclear arms race that is college athletics right now. Hopefully that makes sense. Now, there is, as to Casey's point, there is NIL fatigue, because here's the deal. There are going to be college programs, and you look at the Big Ten and the SEC, that before long are going to be cashing $100 million media rights checks. And when these coaches from these universities are essentially turning around and telling their fan bases that have already cashed into the tune of thousands of dollars for tickets, booster, in the case of BYU Cougar Club memberships, on down the line, everything you got to pay to be a fan of the team that you love, you're proud to root for, your alma mater in many circumstances, the money you're already paying. And for them to say, oh, by the way, if you want to continue to be a quote unquote good fan, you need to contribute to our NIL fund over here. Yeah, there's absolutely fatigue on that front. I'm not saying that Coug Connect and the Royal Blue Collective in the case of BYU are wearing out BYU fans. I'm talking generally across the landscape of college sports. Think about how much money each of you individually puts in to your sports fandom. I would venture to say that the lay fan, the Joe Blow BYU fan out there is already in the tune of thousands of dollars. Well, honestly, there are some coaches out there that believe that you should equal, if not exceed that, in terms of contributions to NIL. I don't know about y'all, but the current circumstances of my finances with 3 kids would be cost prohibitive in my circumstance to contribute that much to my fandom, and then also to add to that to NIL. The big boosters are what is going to make or break, it feels like, these NIL collectives. And I don't mean to say that all the pressure has to go on these big boosters in the case of BYU or any other university, but those are the individuals, frankly, who have the spending money to be able to fund these collectives. To turn this and tell the lay fan that you need to continue to contribute to NIL here is disingenuous at best, and just frankly, it's going to turn a lot of people off if that is going to continue to be the messaging from these universities, who, by the way, pretty quickly here, and BYU is going to be making close to $50 million at the end of their media rights run here in the first run of the Big 12. That is going to ring a little bit hollow when a university says, oh, we got no more money to share with our athletes, but hey, we got to cash the $100 million check over here. That is what's going to grind, I think, a lot of college fans' gears, if it's not already as well. I got to give a tip of cap to Jeff Hansen from Give Him Hell Brigham and Cougar Sports Insider. He wrote a really, really nice newsletter piece. I meant to address this. This goes back at least a couple of weeks, maybe a little bit or more recently than that. And he talked about this very thing. He was ahead of the curve on this. And there is fatigue, because to expect that every fan out there is going to have hundreds, if not thousands of dollars to throw at an NIL collective to keep the best athletes at a university, it's not reality. So there's going to be a breaking point at some point. There is fatigue there. Is there going to be an outright refusal at some point by people to contribute to NIL? Maybe so. But to get to your question, Nick, you got to feel like the big boosters got to be pleased with what BYU basketball is doing, and BYU football, with the success they've had on the recruiting trail, if that can translate to more wins on the gridiron for the BYU football program. Yes, I think the big boosters would be more willing to open up those pocketbooks even wider. I just don't think that casting all of the burden on the lay fan out there, as I mentioned, it doesn't feel right to me. And I think it's going to ultimately cause some long-term issues with regards to there's this undying passion and love, and it exists so deeply at BYU amongst other universities about the programs that people have been rooting for literally their entire lives. But if you continue to just say you got to keep adding money to the pot, well, there's eventually a point that you just can't put any more money in that pot. And if the university or the program is going to say, well, if you don't contribute to this, we're not going to be able to have the success that you create. It's going to become tone deaf. It's going to turn people off if it has not done so already. So it's one of those really, really tough things to navigate here. And I don't know that there's a correct answer to it, but right now there is fatigue. But I do believe that if you want collectives, honestly, this is what it's going to be, because I believe that revenue sharing should be the answer in the end for these college athletes. And if the Dartmouth basketball program and their unionization efforts succeeds, well, keep an eye on that, because that's a private university, the NLRB, the National Labor Relations Board, or whatever they call it. If they rule in favor of those Dartmouth athletes, well, that's a private university. They don't have say over public universities. Oh, wait, BYU, private university? Yeah, that could be something that BYU would have to monitor very, very closely. I'm just saying that's one thing to keep an eye on. There's a whole litany of things. I could do multiple podcasts on that and bore you to death with everything I've read about with regards to NIL and the future and all that stuff. But I think revenue sharing ultimately is where it needs to go. And these universities, yeah, they're going to have to start ponying up and sharing with their athletes, because if they don't, you're going to turn your fan bases off if you continue to tell them that they've got to be the ones that foot this bill. All right, I will step off my soapbox. We'll answer a couple more questions as we continue on right here on the podcast, some football-related ones. As we look ahead to today, will be day 5 of 15 practices for BYU in spring camp. We also learned about the BYU Alumni Game and what's going to happen with that, the rosters and the like. We'll get to all that next right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at LinkedIn. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you guys need to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team, and faster. And more importantly, they do it for free. That's the best part about it. FREE. LinkedIn is not just another job board out there. It's a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals. It makes you the best place to hire, gives you access to professionals you can't find anywhere else, and does all while making the process easy and intuitive. And hiring is super easy when you have that many quality candidates out there. So easy that, in fact, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within the first 24 hours of their job posting. It's an incredible thing. The best part of LinkedIn is they're constantly finding new ways to make the process easier. They even just launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, making the process even easier and quicker and more intuitive, my friend. So take advantage of the opportunity with more than 2.5 million other small businesses who will use LinkedIn for hiring, and post your job for free today at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Post that job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Now, today's show is also brought to you by our friends at Utah Community Credit Union. Some great news for my friends. UCCU has just elevated their checking accounts by enhancing them with more benefits, more savings, and more online protections than ever before. A lot more. Paired with the most advanced and comprehensive mobile banking tools, Elevated Checking is a must-have financial product packed with lifestyle security and financial benefits for you, the consumer. The lifestyle benefits alone include cell phone protection, roadside assistance, telehealth with 24/7 access to licensed health professionals with zero copay, and exclusive savings on travel, shopping, and dining, my friends. And Elevated Checking, the best part is it's free when you do any one of the following. Use your credit or debit card 15 times or more a month, make a monthly direct deposit of $500 or more, or keep an average daily balance of $1,500 in your account. Otherwise, UCCU and their Elevated Checking is just $6 a month to take advantage of these features. Visit uccu.com to open an Elevated Checking account online today, or stop by any branch to open that account in person if that's what you prefer, my friends. It's all courtesy of UCCU. Love where you bank. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen to the day. Thank you for being here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Of course, your team every day. All right, a couple of notes before we go on today's show. It's a tough loss for BYU baseball in their first game as a Big 12 member. It kicked off at what I believe is 30 games? Yeah, it's 30 games of their Big 12 season here. A tough loss out there at West Virginia for the BYU baseball program. Now, they will play a doubleheader today as they had some inclement weather in the forecast. They lost that game 10-4, I should say, by the way, excuse me, losing to West Virginia. Probably should actually let you know the score of that game. They lose at 10-4, but because of inclement weather expected on Saturday, they will play a doubleheader today out there at Monongalia County Ballpark in Morgantown. I'm going to butcher that name to Kingdom Come. I apologize. But a doubleheader day beginning at noon Mountain Time. Game will be on 107.9 FM and also streaming on Big 12 Now on ESPN Plus. Hopefully BYU baseball can bounce back and maybe win the 2 games today to get the rubber match, I guess you should say, by winning the series overall. BYU softball also had their first Big 12 game at home against Texas Tech and lost that one 10-5. They're back in action today against the Red Raiders out there at Gale Miller Field. If you want to go out to that, I believe you can get tickets at BYUCougars.com. And then one other note real quick, just on terms of like kind of news and notes about BYU athletics and things happening, is they've announced officially the alumni game during BYU spring camp will take place on not April. It'll be on March 22nd. It'll be at the West Campus Field, formerly known as Bulldog Stadium, on the campus of Provo High School. The gates will open at 5:00 Mountain Time, and they have announced that they will have a alumni game with a number of great athletes coming back. Remember last year that Max Hall famously tore his Achilles in this game. Well, that's not dissuaded the former, and by the way, he's the all-time winningest quarterback in BYU football history. He is not going to be dissuaded from playing because he is slated to play quarterback once again for the white team, if I recall correctly. Whereas the blue team or Team Navy will have Riley Nelson, Jackson Brown, and Brandon Doman. Max Hall will team up with James Lark and Jake Heaps. Yes, the man, the myth, the legend, Jake Heaps will be back at BYU as a member of this alumni game. You can go at the full roster by going to BYUCougars.com. There's like 60 some odd names on there, but a really, really fun day expected, and they will have a closed practice for the BYU football program. It's a little bit disappointing that they're not going to have an open practice for the fans to go out and watch BYU, that current team practice, but it looks like that is not going to happen this year. So it's a little bit disappointing, but the alumni game, it's been a really, really fun thing in the past, and they're going to broadcast it live on BYU TV again. So looking forward to that. It'll be a 6:00 start out there at the now BYU West Campus Field, now formerly Bulldog Stadium, right there off Freedom Boulevard in Provo. Freedom and Bulldog, honestly, it's right there. And we'll see what happens. Gates will open at 5:00 once again. They'll have food trucks, concessions, and the whole. You know how BYU does. They show up big time when it comes to that. All right, a couple more questions before we go here. I gotta get these in real quick. Question that came in from Danny Drew: any separation at quarterback for BYU, or how close is it? Everything that I have heard / seen is I believe it's very much a 50-50 proposition for BYU at quarterback. You have Jake Retzlaff, who's the incumbent, who's probably more familiar with the overall offense that BYU runs, but you also can't discount what Gerry Bohanon brings, because he has the base level knowledge of this offense. There were some terminologies he acknowledged was different, and some of the philosophy that BYU runs their offense under that was different from his time playing it in this offense at Baylor under Jeff Grimes. But the underlying principles, the formations, a lot of that stuff stays the same. So that's giving Gerry Bohanon a chance to get up to speed pretty quickly here. I think the biggest thing for Gerry Bohanon is showing that the rust of not playing in more than 18 months is gone, because that's the biggest thing for him. But I think it's very much a 50-50 bet right now on which of those two emerges as BYU starting quarterback. And I'll be also very clear about this. Do not expect to hear about a quote-unquote starting quarterback coming out of spring ball. BYU will play it very close to the vest, and I think they'll be very guarded about making any proclamations. Unless Aaron Roderick feels very strongly one way, then he'll make that announcement. I don't expect that to come out of spring camp. All right, one other question here, if I can find it. I clicked on the wrong page here. I love when I do that. Let's see. Last question right here. Oh, there we go. Which of the, so it comes from Riker Wright, excuse me. So which side of the ball do you think will be strongest for BYU this year? I think the defense, he says, I think the defense will be the strongest, the special teams being the weakest, mostly because there are so many unknowns right now. Now, that's interesting proposition right now, Riker, because they tell you in spring camp right now, the BYU offense, in my opinion, is the strongest right now, whereas I think the most potential probably resides with the BYU defense. There are just so many new bodies on the defensive side of the football that Jay Hill's trying to get integrated and up to speed and how to run his defense. But I believe that the potential of BYU's defense is sky high. The reason why the offense is ahead right now, and I believe the offense will continue to remain ahead for some time, is think about how much of the returning talent is on that offensive side of the football. The number of offensive linemen, the vast majority of 99% of their wide receivers stats are back. The tight end core is very solid. The running backs look like they're going to be capable. Quarterback, yes, it's a question mark, but right now, I do think that the offense is ahead. Special teams, it's always a crapshoot. Now they had last year. Remember, I was right there among them, lamenting the fact that BYU quote unquote didn't have a kicker in spring ball. Well, what did Will Farron deliver in the fall? A very steady and frankly a starring role at BYU's kicker position. Ryan Rico was very good at punter. Now, have to replace Ryan Rico at punter, and there's a big question mark there. Yeah, maybe I could agree. Maybe the special teams is beginning to bring up the rear in terms of you're going 1, 2, 3. But I do think right now that the offense is ahead of the defense, but the potential of BYU's defense with Jay Hill leading the way, it is sky high. There is a ton of potential for that unit. So there is a lot of good things going for BYU right now, and we'll see what happens. I am very interested to see how spring camp rolls out, and I will be back out there later this afternoon. If you want live updates from practice sent directly to your phone via text message, well, the one way to do that is to join our Locked On Cougars Insider group. It's links in the show notes below. Whether you're watching this and or listening to it, you can join us. I think we're up near 70 subscribers at this point. So if you want to be a part of that, have an opportunity to win BYU tickets, interact with the show, get your questions to the front of the line when it comes to these mailbags and the like. Locked On Cougars Insider, our group, Locked On Cougars Insider group, I should say, is the way to do just that. All right, that is going to do it for this Friday edition of the show. A big thank you to all of you for your questions, for your interactions with the show, your comments, good, bad, indifferent, otherwise, any and all feedback. And trust me, a lot of you were upset yesterday about my going in on the BYU basketball program after that game was there for the winning for Iowa State. But hey, I don't take offense to it. I say my piece and I stand by it. And you guys agree or disagree. That's what makes sports and sports debate in this format so much fun. And one thing I'm also going to work on doing this offseason is getting back to doing what we used to do a couple years back, called them Fan Fridays, where you guys be co-hosts of this program. So stay tuned for more details on that in coming days and or weeks. All right, there you go. That's it. I'm going to sign off for today. We'll be back tomorrow night, planning on doing a postcast edition after the Oklahoma State game. And obviously then we'll begin our full preparation, looking ahead to the Big 12 Conference Tournament bracket, where BYU slots in, what are the likelihood that they can make a run, and what does the bracketology look for BYU? What does it look like? We'll have that. We'll also have plenty of BYU spring football coverage as well in the week ahead for you guys. So stay with us every single day. Thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen. And as always, thank you for being everydayers right here on the Locked On Cougars podcast.